Pripyat in April 1986 felt like a modern Soviet promise. New apartments, bright street lamps, and a giant power plant on the horizon, supplying electricity to millions. Most residents saw the plant as background infrastructure, like a river or a highway. When a system works every day, people stop imagining it can fail at all. That illusion of normal is where this story begins. Inside the plant, night shifts weren't dramatic, they were disciplined routine. Operators watched gauges, listened to pumps, and wrote notes by desk lamps. Nuclear power is mostly patience. Maintain balance, respect procedures, and never rush the invisible. But routine can become a lullaby, and lulled people miss the first wrong note. That night, Unit 4 was set for a turbine rundown test, meant to prove that during a power loss, spinning momentum could keep pumps running for a short bridge of time. It sounded technical and harmless, the kind of box to check that systems demand. But tests are only safe when conditions match the checklist. Changing conditions turns a routine test into improvisation. Power grid demands delayed the test for hours, and delay creates a dangerous emotion. We have to finish anyway. Instead of canceling, the schedule tightened like a knot. People under pressure start treating safety margins as optional space. The narrator's key lesson? Time pressure is a physical force in a control room. To run the test, the reactor's power had to be lowered. In an RBMK reactor, low power can be tricky. Poisoning effects build, and control becomes less forgiving. Operators chased a narrow target, pushing and pulling knobs like steering on ice. At this point, the story isn't evil. It's human hands trying to keep a complicated machine inside a thin lane. A reactor has its own chemistry, and one of its most important products is xenon-135. A fission byproduct that absorbs neutrons like a sponge. When power drops, xenon builds up, making the reactor stubborn, poisoned, and hard to control. People feel a machine resisting them and often respond by pushing harder. That is the trap. To overcome the reactor's reluctance, operators withdrew more control rods than was safe. Each rod removed was like removing a brake pad to gain speed. The room still looked calm. Lights, panels, quiet voices, while the physics underneath became restless. Disaster often grows in silence, not in shouting. Some safety systems were disabled to avoid interruptions during the test. In real engineering, that's like wedging a door open so it won't close at the wrong moment. The problem is, doors exist for fires you can't predict. By the time you realize you need the door, it's too late to rebuild it. Procedures assume normal conditions, but by now Unit 4 was far from normal. Low power, unstable feedback, disabled protections, and tired people. The checklist was still being followed, but it was following the wrong world. That's a core safety lesson. Compliance can be meaningless when context collapses. Just before 1:23 a.m., the test began. The turbine started to coast down, and pump power began to change. Tiny changes in flow can produce huge changes in stability when margins are thin. The reactor was a tight spring, and the hands in the room didn't yet know it was about to snap. The turbine's momentum was supposed to act like a battery, spinning long enough to keep cooling pumps alive during a gap. As it slowed, electrical output dropped, and the plant's systems began shifting into an unusual configuration. In complex systems, unusual is where hidden interactions wake up. A normal night turned into an experiment inside a live machine. As pump power changed, water flow through the reactor changed too. In an RBMK design, changes in steam and water can feed back into reactivity. The reactor's desire to speed up or slow down. The narrator's trick: imagine a bike where pedaling makes the brakes weaker. That's a feedback loop you don't want at midnight. When water turns to steam inside the core, it creates voids. In many reactors, voids reduce power, but in RBMK they can increase it, a positive void coefficient. That means the reactor can reward the wrong change by accelerating. It's like a microphone too close to a speaker. A small sound becomes a howl. The control room didn't have a single panic light labeled disaster. It had many small indicators, each telling a piece of truth. Humans are good at rationalizing small warnings, especially when the plan says, continue. The plant's signals were becoming a chorus, but tired ears heard only solo notes. In hierarchical systems, people hesitate to challenge a superior, even when they feel danger. The test had momentum. Too much effort had gone into it to stop now. This is not villainy, it's organizational physics. Once a decision moves, stopping it feels like breaking the rules of the universe. The emergency shutdown button, often called AZ5, was designed to insert control rods and stop the reaction. It was the ultimate reset. In normal thinking, pressing it should make everything safer. But design details can turn a safety action into a trigger when conditions are wrong. AZ5 did not cause the disaster by itself. It exposed a dangerous interaction between reactor design and already unstable conditions. In the RBMK, some control rods had graphite tips. During insertion, those tips could briefly increase reactivity before the absorbing part arrived, like applying a push before the brake bites. Under normal conditions, it was manageable. Under unstable, low-power conditions, it was a spark near dry grass. When AZ5 was pressed, the rods began moving in. For a fraction of time, reactivity spiked instead of falling. The reactor lurched like a car skidding when you slam the brakes on ice. In that instant, the physics outran human reaction. The power surge was extreme, far beyond what the system was built to contain. Channels ruptured, steam pressure rose, and the core's structure began to fail. This isn't a scene of gore, it's a scene of mechanical limits being smashed by invisible forces. Pressure is a monster you can't negotiate with. Moments later, explosions tore through Unit 4. The roof was damaged and pieces of the reactor were exposed to open air. From far away, it looked like an industrial fire. Up close, it was something different. An accident that created a continuing source of contamination. Within minutes, alarms and phone calls spread through the plant and Pripyat. People heard fire and imagined a normal emergency. In the Soviet system, information moved upward carefully, filtered by fear of blame. That meant the first hours were filled with action, but short on truth. Fire crews raced to the plant, aiming to stop flames from spreading to other units and systems. They climbed ladders, dragged hoses, and moved toward heat and smoke without understanding the invisible hazard. Their bravery was real, and it mattered, because preventing wider fires prevented an even bigger catastrophe. Some responders saw strange black blocks on the ground, graphite from the reactor core. It looked like building material, not like a warning. This is one of the haunting features of nuclear accidents. The most dangerous clues can look ordinary. Witnesses later described an eerie blue light, often connected to ionized air and radiation effects. It wasn't a magical aura, it was physics interacting with the night. The important point is psychological. People were seeing something unfamiliar, but they didn't yet have language for it. Inside, some leaders refused to believe the reactor had been destroyed. Instruments were unreliable, reports conflicted, denial competed with evidence. In disasters, the first battle is often inside the mind. Accept the impossible, or keep operating as if the world is normal. As dawn approached, helicopters began dropping sand, boron, and other materials to smother the exposed core and reduce emissions. It was improvised warfare against an invisible enemy. Every bucket dropped was a guess, a calculation, and a gamble in the wind. At hospitals, doctors faced patients with conditions that didn't behave like ordinary burns or smoke exposure. They worked fast with limited knowledge and supplies, trying to stabilize people and understand what they were seeing. The emotional weight was heavy. Medicine without clear diagnosis is like repairing a machine in the dark. Morning came and Pripyat looked normal. Kids played, buses ran, and people went to work. Invisible contamination drifted across parks and balconies. The city was living inside a threat it could not see, smell, or taste. A nightmare built from ordinary sunshine. Radiation meters told the truth faster than politics did. Needles slammed to the limit. Improvised teams borrowed meters from anywhere they could. Measurement became a moral act. It forced leaders to admit reality. Numbers can be dangerous to power because they cannot be argued into silence. Reports traveled to Moscow through layers of bureaucracy. Each layer wanted certainty before speaking, and certainty was impossible. Delay is not always malice. Sometimes it's fear of being the first to say the terrible thing. But the plume didn't wait for permission. 2 days later, on April 28th, far away in Sweden, workers at a nuclear plant set off radiation alarms on their own clothes. They checked their facility first, then realized the contamination came from elsewhere. This is one of history's strangest early warnings, an accident detected by people who didn't cause it. Air currents carried radioactive particles across Europe. The plume was not a single cloud, but a shifting pattern shaped by wind, rain, and time. Nuclear accidents ignore borders, passports, and politics. The atmosphere is the ultimate shared infrastructure. Under international pressure, Soviet authorities acknowledged an accident, briefly, cautiously. The statement was small. The event was enormous. This mismatch shaped global trust for years, because people can forgive errors more easily than silence. Outside the USSR, news reports raced ahead of confirmed facts. Maps showed projections. Experts debated what kind of reactor it was. Citizens wondered whether to stay indoors. The uncertainty itself became part of the disaster. A second shockwave made of questions. In Pripyat and nearby towns, people received little clear guidance at first. Some went to school, some attended outdoor events. Leaders feared panic, but the cost of calm without truth is exposure. In a disaster, silence is not neutral. Firefighters managed to stop major fires from spreading to other parts of the plant. That achievement likely prevented additional units from being compromised, but the reactor itself remained an open source, continuing to release contamination. Some problems are not put out, they are contained, slowly, with time and mass. Specialists, physicists, engineers, military units were mobilized to assess and respond. They arrived to a scene that looked like an industrial accident, but behaved like a national emergency. Every decision was a trade. Speed versus certainty, exposure versus containment. Rubble on rooftops around the destroyed reactor emitted extreme radiation. Robots were tried, but many failed in the environment. So humans, liquidators, were sent for short-timed runs to shove debris back into the core area. This is one of the most sobering truths. Sometimes technology fails, and people become the last tool. Drops of boron aim to absorb neutrons. Sand and clay aimed to smother. Lead aimed to shield. Some measures helped, some created new hazards, and all were taken under uncertainty. The response was part science, part improvisation, building a shield while standing next to the dragon. Eventually, officials approved evacuation. The message to residents: take documents, essentials, and expect to return soon. That soon was a psychological cushion, because telling people the truth would mean admitting their city might be lost. Evacuation is not just movement, it is the beginning of grief. On April 27th, hundreds of buses arrived, an orderly, quiet fleet. People stepped outside wearing spring clothes, not realizing they were leaving for decades. The buses were meant to move bodies. They also moved an entire city's identity. Evacuees packed what made sense for a short trip. Documents, a sweater, a photo album, a child's favorite toy. They left behind furniture, pets, books, everything that felt too heavy for 3 days. Disaster steals the future by borrowing it, then never paying it back. As buses rolled out, Pripyat's sound changed. The usual noise, laughter, engines, footsteps, thinned into echo. Empty cities feel unreal, like sets waiting for actors. But this set would be reclaimed by time instead. Pripyat's amusement park was scheduled to open for May Day celebrations. After the accident, it became a symbol, a place built for joy, frozen before its first day. The wheel stands as a calendar you can see. Time stopped on the wrong morning. At checkpoints, people and vehicles were measured, brushed, and sometimes washed. It felt strange, like being treated as hazardous cargo. The process was imperfect, but it was the start of a new routine. Life measured by meters and thresholds. Many families left pets, believing they would return. Animals waited in apartments and courtyards, confused by sudden silence. It's one of the most painful, non-nuclear parts of the story. When you flee danger, you can't carry every bond with you. Evacuees were moved to other towns and given temporary housing, then more permanent arrangements. Bureaucracy tried to turn loss into paperwork, new addresses, new jobs, new schools. But memory doesn't file neatly. It leaks out at night. A perimeter was established, the exclusion zone. A circle on a map became a new kind of border, one not enforced by armies, but by contamination. It's a rare modern thing, a place where nature and danger coexist, and humans must step back. Cleanup workers arrived in rotating waves: soldiers, miners, engineers, volunteers. Their job was not glorious. It was labor against particles. They shoveled, sprayed, hauled, measured, doing small tasks that added up to national survival. Within days, Pripyat was quiet enough to hear wind in the trees. For evacuees, the city didn't disappear. It moved into their minds, becoming a place they visited only in stories and dreams. Chernobyl wasn't just a reactor accident. It was the sudden creation of a lost hometown. To stop ongoing releases, the USSR began constructing a massive concrete and steel enclosure around Unit 4, later called the sarcophagus. It was engineering under emergency conditions: high radiation, limited time, and improvised methods. The structure was not perfect, but perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was better than open. Miners were brought in to dig a tunnel beneath the reactor area to install cooling measures and stabilize the ground. They worked in brutal heat and tight spaces, racing a threat they couldn't see. In history books, disasters have heroes. On the ground, they have shovel marks. The tunnel was intended to stabilize the ground and prepare emergency cooling if the worst occurred. With robots failing, men were sent onto rooftops for timed runs, seconds, to push debris off and retreat. Their bodies became the last reliable machine. It's a scene that explains why the word liquidator feels both technical and tragic. Decontamination efforts washed streets, buildings, vehicles, and soil, but you can't truly wash dust out of a forest. The work reduced exposure and slowed spread, yet it also revealed a hard truth. Some contamination becomes part of the landscape. Cleanup is a fight against time, not a clean reset. Scientists mapped hotspots, places where particles collected in surprising patterns: roofs, gutters, puddles, low-lying soil. Radiation doesn't spread evenly, it hides in corners. Mapping turned fear into strategy. If you know where the fire is hottest, you can step around it. Downwind of the plant, pine trees turned reddish-brown and died, creating what became known as the rent forest. It was one of the first visible signs that the environment had been hit hard. Nature became the accident's display screen, silent, vast, and impossible to ignore. Beyond Pripyat, many villages were evacuated or relocated. For rural communities, the loss was different: gardens, graves, barns, and local rhythms. When you move a village, you move a century of habits. International agencies and foreign scientists monitored fallout and offered expertise. The Cold War complicated cooperation, but radiation created a common interest: measurement, containment, prevention. Chernobyl became a global classroom that no one wanted to attend. People who were exposed faced medical monitoring for years: checks, blood tests, uncertainty. The hardest part wasn't always symptoms, it was not knowing what would happen later. Invisible threats create long, invisible anxieties. In late 1986, the sarcophagus was completed, an emergency shell built at astonishing speed. It reduced emissions and allowed the wider crisis to stabilize. But it also locked in a new reality. The reactor wasn't fixed, it was entombed, and future generations would inherit the maintenance of that tomb. Chernobyl damaged more than a reactor. It damaged trust. When people feel information is managed instead of shared, they assume the worst. Trust is a safety system too. It helps citizens respond correctly in emergencies. Without it, even good instructions arrive late and fragile. At the time, the plant stood in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, within the USSR. In the late Soviet era, reforms like glasnost were already emerging, pushing for openness. Chernobyl intensified that pressure. Secrecy looked less like strength and more like danger. Disasters can change politics because they expose what a system tries to hide. Across Europe, governments tested food, especially milk, because certain isotopes concentrate there. Parents asked simple questions. Is breakfast safe? That's how you know an event is historic. It reaches into kitchens, not just headlines. Explaining radiation is hard because it's invisible, statistical, and delayed. Scientists used metaphors: particles, doses, time. Communication became part of emergency response because people need mental tools to act calmly. Stories often focus on a few dramatic heroes, but Chernobyl was also thousands of ordinary people doing unglamorous tasks: measuring, hauling, washing, building. Heroism sometimes looks like a checklist completed at dawn. Fallout hit regions unevenly, especially parts of Ukraine and Belarus. Some towns were relocated, others lived with contamination maps and restrictions. The disaster's footprint was not a single circle, it was a patchwork quilt stitched by wind and rain. With people gone, buildings froze in time. School books sat on desks, posters peeled, toys lay in cribs. The zone became a time capsule of late Soviet life, preserved not by museums, but by evacuation. Over years, wildlife returned: wolves, boar, birds, because humans left. Nature reoccupied the space, but contamination remained in soil and organisms. The zone became a paradox: thriving life inside a wound. Chernobyl changed nuclear safety culture worldwide. Design reviews, emergency planning, operator training, and international reporting. It didn't end nuclear power, but it ended the illusion that it can't happen here. Safety became more explicit, written in bloodless but hard-earned lessons. The disaster highlighted systemic issues: production targets, rigid hierarchy, and fear of reporting bad news. Chernobyl didn't single-handedly end the USSR, but it contributed to a broader loss of confidence. When citizens stop believing, even strong-looking structures begin to wobble. The 1986 sarcophagus was built fast, and time found its weaknesses: gaps, corrosion, settling structures. Emergency engineering buys years, not eternity. The real legacy of Chernobyl is not only what happened in 1986, but what maintenance demanded after. Decades later, an even larger structure, the new safe confinement, was built and slid into place over Unit 4. It was a global engineering project designed to last longer and enable cleanup work inside. It's the quiet finale: a giant arch moved slowly like a continent of steel. The exclusion zone became a controlled space: monitored workers, research teams, and limited visits under rules. It's not a ghost story, it's a safety protocol. The zone teaches that modern disasters can create new geographies, places defined by risk rather than borders. Pripyat is often photographed because it feels cinematic, but the deeper value is ethical. It reminds us what gets erased when systems fail. The city isn't cool ruins, it's a memorial to normal life interrupted. Safety experts often describe accidents as layers of defense with holes. When holes line up, catastrophe passes through. Chernobyl was a textbook example. Design flaws, procedural violations, pressure, and poor communication aligning at the wrong moment. RBMK reactors had advantages: high output, refueling while operating, but also specific risks. After Chernobyl, modifications were made, and safety practices improved. The lesson isn't technology bad. Its technology must be treated like a contract with reality. Modern safety culture emphasizes the power to pause. Operators must be empowered to stop a test, challenge a supervisor, and report bad news. The hardest button in any system isn't AZ5. It's the courage to say no when schedules scream yes. Chernobyl sits inside a bigger debate: how societies power themselves. Every energy source carries trade-offs, visible and invisible. The goal is not perfection. It's honesty, redundancy, and humility. Big power demands big responsibility. For evacuees, Chernobyl is not a policy lesson. It's family memory: a suitcase, a bus ride, a city that never returned. Generations inherit stories, and those stories shape how people trust institutions, science, and promises. Chernobyl teaches that disasters are rarely single mistakes. They are chains, design choices, workplace culture, fatigue, pressure, and the human need to believe things are under control. The night of April 26, 1986, turned a city into a memory and a safety lesson into a global warning. Our tiny storytellers leave with one simple idea. Systems must be built to handle human limits, because humans will always have limits. And its lessons still shape how we design power, safety systems, and truth today.